In this module, we're going to talk about monitoring and big data management. And what I'm going to cover is how do we actually monitor the jobs that run on the Hadoop cluster, look at the different ways to visualize the health of the informatica platform. Like I said, right, if we run a job, run a profile on Hadoop, what are the types of logs we can look at? So again, this is tuned to more the operations folks, more of the developer folks that are constantly working through mappings and trying to figure out, hey, what happened to the mapping, why isn't the process running, and where do we actually go ahead and look for where do we go ahead and look for these logs. So from a service health and maintenance aspect, right, you want to get a bird's eye view of the health of your informatica domain, health of the services, look at the utilization, look at past events, right, and really understand what's going on with your platform, so you can perform service management tasks in a jiffy. I'll walk through what I'll do is I've got a couple of slides here. So I'll kind of walk through what you can do, how you can find things, and then I'll switch over back to my environment where I can show you what this all looks like, right? So if I log onto my informatica environment, I can look at, on the right-hand side, CPU usage. I can look at memory usage, look at number of services that have been installed. If I look at a particular, in the middle of the screen, if I look at some of the services that I have, and for instance, you're looking at the DIS service, I'll be able to look at different properties, right? I can look at the properties, view the history, view logs, view dependencies, recycle, disable the service. So this screen gives me that bird's eye view of what is happening within my cluster. In terms of monitoring, right, what are the types of jobs that I can see, right? I can see, ad hoc mappings that are run, deployed mappings. I look at the Hive jobs, Blaze jobs, look at profiling, scorecards, look at workflows. So these are the types of jobs that I'll be able to monitor while they're executing. You can also see extended stats, meaning you can see the throughput, of the source target read-write performance. You can look at resource utilization, and then you can see job progress pretty much up to the minute. So when I look at as I talked about, right? So when I look at the job stats, I can see the type of object that's running. Here I pointed out you've got workflows. You see the mapping tasks. You can look at summary. You look at the details tasks, and you look at the throughput. The monitoring in BDM is web-based, right? So we're not going back to what most folks are accustomed to as like a Power Center workflow monitor. You don't have that thick client that you need to install. This is all web-based. It's all a web-based client. So we look at job statistics summary. Again, you look at the state of a job, look at the resource utilization of the job, and you can actually look at the summary stats. And in my environment, I don't have a lot of jobs that are going on, but this is a snapshot of what we're doing in-house, what our QA guys are doing in-house testing, right? So you look at ad hoc jobs, you look at the deployed jobs. It gives you the stats of what is completed, what is aborted. Look at the different types of connections, workflows, and different types of objects at a very high level. You could manage the scheduling of the jobs, view, modify, create schedules for particular workflows, mappings, and objects that would be scheduled to run. You could resolve conflicts. We didn't really talk about version control, but this is another thing that you could do. Right? You could see, you can apply version control. So let's say if a developer, and I laugh because this is always the case, if a developer locks an object and he goes on vacation, you're kind of stuck. What do you do next, right? So an operator, an admin can release the lock of the object that developer is taking a vacation and has been working on it, and can check in that object on behalf of the developer, right? So has the ability to do that. In terms of tips and tricks, right? One of the best practices that I typically recommend customers doing is actually standing up a second model repository service, right? And a separate schema. If you're leveraging Oracle as your database, set up a separate schema as an operational store for your monitoring, right? And this goes back to increasing performance. Because remember, if I go back, let me just move forward then. So if I look at all the jobs that run, anything that I do, remember, all of this information is persisted to the repository. So think about it this way. If I've got a developer who's running a job, or if I've got a job in production, right, that is constantly running, we've got 1,000, it runs 1,000 times in an hour, or or 1,000 times within a given time period. All that logging information is stored in the repository. So what will happen is my repository gets larger over time, and it becomes a pretty difficult or a nightmare to manage. So I typically recommend that customers, what they do is set up a second repository service. The first repository service is where I build all my mappings, build all the artifacts, and the second repository service will be used as an operational store to capture, manage all the logging that happens within the model repository, within the data integration service. I'll walk through this, but if you're running this, you will be running this mapping in Blaze, Hive, on MapReduce, or even on Spark. You'll be able to get detailed statistics about the job, right? So you'll be able to look at, again, high level, look at the mapping, look at the different segments that the task has been running on, be able to get a summary stats of what that job's doing. So you look at the throughput, look at the rows, average rows per second byte. So you really get that granular information that you're looking for. Again, you get more detailed stats. You can look at, you get more detailed stats about source target throughput over the particular window of the particular job that has been running. I'll show you this here in a second, but this is covered in the Blaze overview as well. Blaze has its own job monitor, right? So what I could do is if I execute a mapping, I run it on Blaze. At the bottom here, you see monitoring URL. That's the Blaze job monitor. When you click on the Blaze job monitor, this takes you to another web UI interface, which is called the Blaze job monitor. Recall I talked about the application timeline server, and the timeline server is the one that captures the stats and maintains the stats about the jobs that are running on the Hadoop cluster when you're leveraging Blaze, right? So you can use this, if you're going to go debug, you can log on to the Blaze job monitor, look at the troubleshoot the job. If you're looking to see why the job had failed, it gives you a lot more detail of how that job was processing on the Hadoop cluster. In terms of the Hadoop environment logs, now one of the questions that I typically get is, do I really need to worry, or do I really need to care about the Hadoop logs that I get generated? And sometimes yes, you should be, at least you should be aware of how to navigate to where the Hadoop logs are. And the reason is, there could be some times, right? Remember, when Informatica processes on Hadoop, the DIS is a client that submits a job to the Hadoop cluster. that Hadoop cluster then is going to manage the processing of that job. So, for whatever reason, something goes wrong and you want to try and debug, it's good to kind of know, okay, I can log onto the Hadoop environment, I can navigate to where the logs are and figure out what happened to my particular job if it doesn't show up in my Informatica monitoring tool. The first place where I would look at is I'll look at the Yarn Resource Manager. And here it'll list out all the jobs that are running on the Hadoop cluster. So if I'm using Spark, if I'm using Hive on MapReduce, if I'm using Hive on Tez, it'll show up here as an application. And I click on that application, it'll lead me more to the log, to more details about that job run. So this is the first place that I'll start, right? And then I can navigate and say, okay, let me look at the history of that particular job, and I can navigate to the logs downstream. If I'm looking at big data specific logs, right? So I've got 3 engines that I'm looking at, right? I've got the Blaze engine. If you look in the Hadoop env properties file, this file, recall in my pre-install install config overview, this is the Hadoop environment properties file that is located in the Informatica shared configuration directory, Hadoop distribution configuration directory, and this will tell you where the logs live for Blaze, right? So you can navigate to var logs, Hadoop Yarn apps Informatica, and you'll see the logs for the Blaze engine. If you're looking at the Hive engine specific, what you could do is the Informatica installation directory. So you log on to the DIS, navigate to Tomcat bin DIS, depending where the DIS temp is, and you'll see logs related to the session run. And then Spark, you'll be able to look at the logs through the monitoring URL, track the job on the Hadoop cluster. Before we recap, let's go back to my environment and take a look at some of the monitoring logging features. Okay, so back to my environment, right? So I'm looking at the developer tool and I'm going to run this mapping. So I'm going to run this mapping, and I've already configured it, right, to use Hadoop and the Hadoop configuration. So if I log back and I look at, let me log out of here. Okay, so this is my Informatica administrator tool. So if I look at my monitoring tool, now what I can do as an operator, I can set up my monitoring tool and I can give access to my developers to just the monitoring portion, right? So when I log into the monitoring section, I can only see monitoring statistics. I don't get to see domain specific configuration. So if I navigate and expand the DIS, right, so I've got different applications. I look at ad hoc because it was an ad hoc mapping run that I did. Let me do this. Let me go back and run that mapping because it it ran faster than I could log on to the monitoring tool. So if I go back and I do a refresh here, it should show up as a job that's running. And if I expand, it's taking a little longer than I did. Okay, so let that run and see if it'll expand. But at the bottom of the screen, I see properties about that job. I can look at the Blaze execution plan, right? So the smart executor decided that it would use Blaze as the engine to run the job, so it created this Blaze execution plan. I can look at summary statistics right now because I didn't run the job. Let's see if that'll refresh. Yeah. Right. Okay. There we go. Took a while to click through it, but I should be able to see summary statistics. There we go. So you can see summary statistics of the particular job, right? Number of rows it read from the source, the average rows per second, very detailed statistics. If I look at detailed, yeah. So it didn't pull up detailed statistics because the mapping ran so fast, there's no need to pull out the detailed statistics. But if I look at the properties and look at the mapping task, again, this tells me, expand this. Oh, don't worry. These are the sub mappings, the segments that run on the Hadoop cluster, right? So I'm going to go back and see if I can do this. Okay, let me do this. Let me run this, and it'll default to Blaze right now because it's using Blaze. What I wanted to go through was look at the job monitor and see if there's anything running, if there's anything that's running pretty fast. There we go. So here you can see, using the job monitor, I can see the job that's running, right? So if I expand, I can see the different tasks. I can see in real time that the job is running, and I see different segments of that particular task is run and has completed successfully. So if I go back to my monitoring URL and take a second to come back, and yeah, so it did complete, right? So this is at the Blaze level, right? So I can go back and I can see at the job monitor what the Blaze engine is. So if I go back, right, let me do this and come to the bottom of the screen, and it says mapping ran successful. I can go to the log, and I can go and I can navigate the log, right? If there's any errors, I can navigate through and I can see the log. So one thing that's pretty nice here is that this has a kind of a look and feel of what we are used to seeing in the workflow monitor, right? So I can go ahead and see, okay, this is all this is the statistics for the particular run. So what I'm going to do is, let's do this and see if we can run this in Hive on MapReduce. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to force the engine to pick Hive on test, and if this goes well, I should be able to run this using Hive on test or Hive on MapReduce. So fingers crossed on this one. So now this is going to run using Hive on MapReduce, Hive on test. So it's going to take a little longer to run, but if I go back and look at my monitoring, and voila, right? So let's see. Right, so here we have Hive execution plan. This is what Informatica would submit to Yarn and Hive server and the Hive to process. It won't have summary stats yet because it's still collecting that information. It's still running on Hadoop cluster, right? So I can look at and see different queries being executed on the Hadoop cluster. If I go back and look at my Yarn resource manager UI, I can see that, okay, here is the job that's running. It's using Hive on test. It's still running, and it will write, these are containers and memory it's using, and queues and whatnot. So if I look at the application ID and look at the status of the job, and I can go back and I can really dive into the logs itself, and I can pull the entire log that it has. Let's see, something happened here. Did it fail? Yeah, right. So this mapping failed. So for whatever reason, this mapping failed when it shouldn't have. But this is a good exercise, right? I can go navigate now what my why this job failed, right? So oh yeah, here we go. So here's the job ID. If I click on that, that'll bring up my Yarn Resource Manager web UI, and I can see what the status is. For some reason it shows as succeeded. That's not good because Informatica reported the job as failed, right? So I can go to the logs, and I can navigate through the logs. If I say click on full log, why didn't it bring up the full log? But it should have brought back the full log with an error message as to why. Oh, there we go. Here's the this is right. So it should give an error saying why. Let's see, error. Right. So this is the error message, and it give me some weird error message that I'm not sure of what it is. Right. So I can go back and debug that. Now, if I don't have access to the Yarn yarn URI, what I can do is go back to the mapping, right? And if I pull up the mapping log, go to the logs and expand my mapping, and if I look for, let's see, error. Alright, so this is the same message that it captured from the Hadoop cluster, right? So this is the same message that I saw over at the Hadoop cluster that Informatica reported back to me. So if I don't have access to Yarn Resource Manager, the Informatica will collect the consolidated log and then it'll bring it back to you. The other way I can look at this is if I look at there we go. If I look at Hive session log, right? So if I go back and I look at this particular log, remember this log is being captured on my DIS. Oh, what did I do here? Okay, so if I go back and capture this on the DIS, go back to, here's my DIS. I'm going to clear out here so it goes back to, and I can go cd/ get out of the configuration directory. And what I can do is, let's see, since I copied it, I should have copied it. Copy this guy. Okay, so if I look at this particular log, right, remember what I talked about is logs get captured in DIS temp. I can navigate to my BDM server and look at the log, and bingo, it's got the same log information, right? So in a nutshell, you have quite a few options to go and debug as to why the job failed, right? So a quick recap. I ran my mapping and my mapping failed. I opened the log and I looked at the log and I found what the error was. I can now ask my Hadoop admin to help me out debug why this error occurred. If I scroll up and if I look for Hive session log, I can navigate to my Informatica BDM server where I can view what the contents of that log is. This is the same contents that was captured in my mapping log. If I want to go further, I can go to the Yarn URI web-based GUI through my monitoring tool. So I log into my Informatica monitor, look at my application, I click on my application ID, it gives me the log information. I can scroll down and I can look and see why this job has failed, right? So a number of ways you can figure out why the job has failed. In this case, I know why something was wrong with my TES engine. So what I can do is, to fix this, I can go back. I believe it was TES. Let's see. Okay, I guess it wasn't TES. But anyway, you get the idea, right? When I debug a mapping failure on Hadoop, I've got a number of ways to do this, right? I can look at the mapping log that Informatica captures within the developer tool. I can look at the command line Hive session log, which is stored on the BDM server, or I can navigate over to my Yarn Resource Web UI, where I can navigate the application ID through the Informatica monitoring tool, and I can capture what that what additional logs are out there. Okay, so to recap, we looked at talked about the job statistics, gave you an overview of how to troubleshoot mapping failures when you run a job on Hadoop on a Hadoop cluster. And that concludes this module.